Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Ramona was waiting for her friend Lina, who was currently talking to the teacher. The girl was looking at the school and mentally bid farewell to it with pleasure. She had graduated. Ramona had been counting down the days for 6 months, eagerly anticipating leaving the walls of the educational institution. The girl smiled bitterly and thought that she used to love learning and happily went to school. But everything changed in an instant. It all had to do with the fact that the girl's father, as far back as she could remember, constantly consumed strong drinks. And then Salvador Ibanez, for disciplinary purposes, often used the belt on her and her older brother. When Ramona and Mariano were little, they would hide behind their mother, and the woman got all the blows. As they grew older, the brother and sister, when they saw that their father was coming home drunk, tried to hide from him. This angered Salvador, and he vented his anger on his wife, Wanda. The children saw this, but couldn't do anything to help. They could only cry, hiding in a secluded place. At that moment, they dreamed that some fairy tale hero would come and save their mom. Ramona and her brother grew up and often asked their mother why she endured their father's abuse. In response, the woman would smile and say that when they grew up, they would understand. Ramona couldn't understand her mother's answers, and one day she asked, "Mommy, but you suffer physically. Why don't you divorce Dad?" "Daughter, you see, I love your father. And remember, there's a folk saying that if a husband beats his wife, it means he loves her." "Indeed. You often have to cover bruises with concealer." "I certainly don't want such a relationship with my future husband," the daughter said fervently. "Wait, grow up first. Then you'll understand when you get married." Time passed. Mariano was already 18. And now, when the father mistreated the mother, the boy stood up for her. Wanda realized that her son was trying to protect her from her own husband. She often told Mariano not to approach his father during moments of rage. The son replied that he couldn't watch his dad behave inappropriately. And the woman was very afraid that the day would come when Mariano would not endure and raise his hand against his father. And that day came. Salvador came home in a bad mood with a bottle of cheap alcohol. Instead of a little white bottle, he was given a kilogram of dumplings and a couple of jars of preserves. The wife was delighted with this, as it was a great help for the family. After all, the husband didn't work anywhere, and she worked as a mail carrier, earning a small salary. That's why Wanda enthusiastically said upon her husband's return, "What a pleasant surprise. We haven't had dumplings in a long time. I'll cook them now, and we'll have a royal dinner." "What are you saying?" "You'd better give me money for a bottle," the husband said angrily. "I don't have any, dear. I have a couple dollars in my wallet for bread, and it's still 3 days until my paycheck." "We'll live without bread. Dumplings have dough. It's the same as bread," the husband said, taking his wife's bag, from which he pulled out a modest wallet. Then the man took out 200 bills and grinned. Seeing this, Wanda rushed to her husband to stop him, but he maliciously pushed her away. The woman tearfully begged him to leave the money. His wife's plea angered the man. Salvador slapped his wife several times on the cheek with his palm, and at that moment, their son, who had just returned from work, entered the room due to the noise. Mariano instantly understood the situation and rushed to his father to prevent him from hitting his mother again. However, Salvador had already pushed his wife hard, and she, unable to withstand the blow, fell to the floor, hitting her head on the wall. Wanda let out a weak groan, and in the meantime, Mariano lunged at his father. The head of the family, seeing that his son wanted to hit him, pushed the boy, and then a fight ensued between them. Wanda screamed for them to stop, and she got up from the floor to stop the scuffle. As soon as she approached them, her husband, scheming, kicked her in the side. The wife bent over and slowly sank to the floor. Mariano, seeing that his mother, grimacing in pain, had fallen, without hesitation ran to the kitchen, where he grabbed a knife. The young man returned and, in a fit of rage, inflicted several stab wounds on his father. Only when the father fell did he rush to his mother. Wanda grabbed her son's hand and asked him to call an ambulance. Soon, an ambulance arrived at the scene, followed by the police. The woman was taken to the hospital by ambulance, and Salvador was taken to the mortuary, as he had died from the injuries. Mariano was taken to the police station by law enforcement representatives, pending an investigation. Ramona learned all this when she came home from a walk. The neighbor, who was invited as a witness, informed her of everything. Ramona tried to get more information from the neighbor, but she said she didn't know all the details. The girl thanked the elderly woman and only then let her tears flow. She understood that, at the moment, she wouldn't find out anything concrete until she saw her mother. And she couldn't meet with her because the minibus to the city no longer ran at that time, and there was no money for a taxi. The girl didn't close her eyes all night. She had been speculating on what had happened. And as soon as morning came, she went to the city on the first bus. After a while, Ramona was sitting in her mother's hospital room, and Wanda quietly told her what had happened. The woman, as she was speaking, sporadically sobbed. She was trying to hold back her tears. When Wanda told her daughter everything, she began to get up from the bed, saying that she wouldn't lie in the hospital. Ramona tried to resist her mother, saying that she had already talked to the doctor, and the doctor said the victim had a broken arm and a concussion. After her daughter's words, the mother looked sadly at her and whispered, "Don't you understand? Your father is no longer alive, and your brother is awaiting punishment for what he did. But your escape won't change anything. It won't bring back father. You're right, but I must accompany my husband on his final journey. Somehow, he's still my spouse and deserves to be buried properly. Mom, I don't care about Dad. He constantly abused you, and my brother and I had our share of it too. And now he almost maimed you, and you're still thinking about him. Stop speaking ill of your father. You have no right to do that." The mother sharply replied, then added a bit more gently, "When you love someone with all your heart, you'll understand. And I loved your father." Soon, Wanda was discharged from the hospital in good condition. Mother and daughter, before heading home, stopped at the police station where Mariano was held. There, they learned that the young man would not be released because he was arrested for a serious crime, to which he openly confessed. Wanda pleaded with the law enforcement officer not to prosecute her son, as he had stood up for her. However, the officer told the woman that he couldn't decide anything and that there would be an investigation, followed by a trial. After some time, Salvador was buried. For Ramona, it was a big surprise that so many people came to bid farewell to this man who couldn't go a day without alcohol. The girl looked at the villagers with amazement as they spoke kind words about her father. Ramona couldn't understand how these people could speak so highly of a man who constantly abused his wife. The day after the funeral, Ramona's friend came, who already knew what had happened. Lina asked her friend how Wanda was feeling. Ramona smirked and sadly replied that her mother was mourning her beloved husband. Also, Mariano might face punishment. Lina sat down with her friend and said, "It will be tough for your mother to live here now, especially if she continues to mourn for Mariano." "What nonsense are you talking about? He's her son," Ramona exclaimed indignantly. "Don't get upset, but you know, I overheard my parents talking yesterday, and I'd better tell you everything so you're prepared for it. So they blame your brother for intentionally taking your father's life. You see, your father was like a lifesaver for the villagers. He had golden hands, he could fix a roof, build a log house, and dig a well, all for free. They'd buy him a bottle, and he'd be happy. And now they have no one to turn to for help without paying a lot of money. Our villagers just used his skills, they don't care what happens to Mariano. But he was defending my mother. He's not guilty of anything. But I explained to you why the villagers are talking like that. You and I know what your father was really like, but for others, he was always cheerful and always ready to help for a small fee. I'm just telling you this so you're prepared when you hear something inappropriate about you." And indeed, a couple of days after the father's funeral, Ramona went to the store for bread. As she was passing by, she saw a neighbor who lived a couple of houses away from them. Ramona politely greeted the woman, who gave her a disdainful look and remained silent. The girl shrugged in bewilderment and continued on her way when suddenly, unexpectedly, the neighbor said, "Mariano is a scoundrel. He killed such a person. In a few months, there will be no one to dig the garden because Salvador is no longer in this world. He was such a good person. And your brother, the soul killer." Ramona turned to the woman and exclaimed passionately, "What do you know? My father was a terrible person. He abused his wife and terrorized her. Mariano defended his own mother from a tyrant, and he accidentally killed my brother. That's how it happened. Yes, we all know that Salvador raised his hand to his wife, but your mother continued to live with him, so she must have liked it. And Mariano raised his hand to his own father. He had no right to do that. What can I say to you? You're probably just like your brother." The woman said maliciously, spat on the snow, and then went her way. Ramona barely held back tears, trying not to cry right there on the street. She didn't go to the store but ran home. She entered the house, and only there did her tears flow. Wanda came out of the room to cry. She walked to her daughter, sat down next to her, and asked what happened. The girl told everything in detail. The mother hugged her daughter and asked her to calm down, then said softly, "You should stay strong, my dear. You know that there are malicious tongues in the village, and you encountered such a lady who couldn't wait to say nasty things. But wait, time will pass, and passions will calm down. Now we need to worry about Mariano. The investigation is ongoing, and the trial is coming up soon. He will definitely get a prison sentence. How will we live without him? And anyway, I'll finish school now and go to the city, and you'll be all alone. Don't worry about me. Okay, I see that you didn't buy bread. Come on, then, and I'll quickly make some pancakes." Soon, the trial took place. Mariano was given several years of imprisonment. Ramona and her mother, upon hearing the sentence, were as if struck dumb. They hoped that the punishment would not be so severe. Wanda came to her senses only after a few minutes and began to wail. And Mariano, as he was being led out of the courtroom, shouted to Ramona to take care of their mother. The girl only nodded in response. As she couldn't speak, a lump was stuck in her throat that she couldn't swallow. And now, Ramona has graduated from high school and was waiting for her friend. During this time, when Mariano was imprisoned, the girl repeatedly heard malicious words directed at her, stating that her brother was the ultimate scoundrel and that his prison sentence was too short. Ramona tried to ignore such people. Yet, the bitterness after encounters with such individuals always lingered. Soon, Lina approached with cheerful news that she was now free and they could go home. Ramona smiled at her friend and asked if she was ready to go to the city in the near future. Lina playfully winked at her companion and happily nodded. And now, after some time, Ramona was preparing to leave for the city to attend college. Before leaving, her mother said she wanted to talk. The girl replied that she would listen attentively and looked at her mom. Wanda looked at her daughter and, with a sad smile, said, "How beautiful you've become. You've got long eyelashes and neat lips. I want to tell you, my daughter, that city people are very different from our village folks, and guys, they're sweet talk in a way that makes girls lose their heads. Mom, if you want to tell me to be cautious, I remember that. Don't worry about it. But I also want to tell you something. If I can't get into the economics college, I won't come back here. I'll stay in the city, get a job, rent a room, and live there. Next year, I'll try to get in again. Just don't be upset, but I don't want to go back to the village. Even though it's been 6 months since Dad's gone, the malicious tongue still can't calm down. I understand you, and I don't blame you for your decision. Maybe your life will work out there, and I'll spend my days here. My husband is buried here, and I'll wait for Mariano. It will be hard for him too when he is released. I hope that over so many years, everything will be forgotten." And soon, Ramona left. Despite her wishes, the girl couldn't get into the college. She missed a few points. Ramona called her mother and told her everything. Wanda sympathized with her daughter and told her not to be discouraged. She also asked Ramona to call more often and report everything. After that, the girl called her friend, who also went to study in another city. Ramona informed Lina about her failure and asked how things were going for her. The friend cheerfully reported that she had been accepted to a teacher's college and would start studying soon. Then the girls agreed not to lose touch and told each other everything. Ramona rented a room with a girl who also didn't get into the college. They became friends immediately before the exams and got along well. The girl lived in a neighboring village, and she also didn't want to return home. Her name was Serafina. Ramona immediately decided that she needed to find a job since she realized that her mother's salary wouldn't be enough to support her. At the same time, she knew that she needed to help her mother at the moment because Wanda was saving money to visit her son. Ramona was lucky with a job right away. She was hired at a small store where the working day was from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening. The work schedule was 2 days of work and 2 days off. This suited the girl very well. However, after working for the first month, Ramona was unpleasantly surprised as there was stock-taking and a shortage. The girl couldn't understand why this happened. Meanwhile, the store manager took the shortage from Ramona's and her colleagues' salaries. When the girl received her money, she saw that she was deprived of the third part of her salary. Natalia was very upset about this because she wanted to buy herself boots for the fall, which she had chosen, and also send some money to her mother. The girl decided that she wouldn't buy new things this month and would do it next month. For herself, Ramona also decided not to tell her mother about the shortage so as not to upset her unnecessarily. Another month passed. They conducted stock-taking again and identified a shortage. When Ramona heard the amount, she couldn't stand it and burst into tears. She couldn't understand why such significant shortages were happening. After hearing the sum, the girl's tears did not soften the manager's heart. The director again deducted almost half of the financial compensation as a repayment for the shortage. At that moment, the girl declared she wanted to quit. She didn't want to work for free. Ramona was thinking about where she could find a job. She didn't want to go into trade because she was terribly afraid that she would work for a month again and have to give up half her salary. So, she decided to try her hand at being a waitress. Ramona found a job in a cozy cafe in the center of the city. Everything suited her except for one thing: it was very far from the home where she rented a room. Soon, the girl was running around the cafe in her uniform, moving from table to table. After a month, she received a decent salary. Ramona immediately transferred the money to her mother. A couple of weeks passed. The girl, as always, came to work, changed into her uniform, and went to the hall, where the first visitor had already entered. It was a middle-aged man in a business suit. Ramona approached him and politely asked what he would like to order. The man looked at the waitress with interest and said, "Tell the chef that Alejandro Alvarez has arrived, and he will pick something for me." "All right, as you say," the girl said, somewhat surprised. She had been working here for over a month, and this visitor was the first time she saw him. Ramona went to the kitchen and conveyed the request to the male chef. The cook smiled and said, "Alejandro hasn't been here for a long time. Come to the kitchen in about 10 minutes, and the order will be ready." Soon, Ramona brought several dishes to the visitor on a tray and placed them in front of the man. Just as she was about to leave, the stranger suggested she sit next to him. The girl replied that staff was not allowed to do that and would be fined for it. The man laughed and said that when he asked her to do it, the waitress would not be fined. Ramona sat down cautiously. She was afraid that the cafe manager would come out and scold her. Meanwhile, Alejandro was asking the girl who she was, how long she had been working here, and what her name was. Ramona answered and kept looking at the entrance, expecting the cafe director to come in. After some time, the visitor finished his meal and asked for the bill. The girl announced the amount, and the man took out several bills and put them on the table, saying that he didn't need change. After that, Alejandro stood up and headed for the exit. The girl was watching him leave and only then looked at the money. She saw that the visitor had paid double the bill. Ramona felt awkward and wanted to return part of the money, so she ran to the exit. But it was too late. Alejandro got into the car, and the vehicle started moving. The girl became curious about who this person was, and she decided to find out from the chef. Ramona approached the man in the white apron and awkwardly asked him, "Who is Alejandro Alvarez?" "He's a friend of our boss. He owns an auto repair shop. He used to come here to eat often, but now not so much." Ramona thanked the chef for the information and went to the hall since more customers had arrived. The girl spent the whole day taking orders and thinking about her new acquaintance. As the working day was coming to an end, the manager of the establishment called her to his office. She walked into the room with fear and asked what had happened. Eduardo Gil looked at the waitress with a smile and said, "You really stood out today. A friend of mine came to eat, and you served him. He spoke highly of you. I feel like you've made an impression on him. Alejandro gave me a lot of money for the order. I should return it to him." The girl, who thought the boss was calling her to scold her for sitting and talking with a visitor during working hours, said it embarrassedly. "He's well aware of how much he left for the order. You don't have to worry about it. Just for the future, if Alex wants to pay, don't take money. It's on the house. There will be another customer whose payment you don't need to take. You'll see him soon. He's also my friend. Thank you for letting me know." At that moment, the door to the office swung open, and a smiling Alejandro walked in. Eduardo got up from his chair and quickly approached his friend, hugging him immediately. Then the cafe manager said with a smile, "I see you had a good rest by the sea, and the tan skin suits you well." The girl looked at the new acquaintance at that moment and was about to slip away unnoticed when Alejandro asked her to stay for a moment. Ramona looked at the boss with embarrassment, and he nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Alex turned to his friend. "The working day is almost over. Allow me to steal one of your waitresses a little earlier. I understand you're talking about Ramona. No questions, but only if the girl agrees. Trust me, we'll leave your office now, and I'll be able to persuade this beauty to let me escort her under a plausible pretext." "Well, try your luck," Eduardo said, laughing. After these words, Alejandro suggested that Ramona leave the office, and as soon as they left, he, smiling, asked for permission to accompany the girl home. She laughed and then said, "I think you've already decided everything without me. Still, tell me, what if I refuse your offer? What will you do?" "I'll cry loudly, and you'll be ashamed that they brought such a mature man to tears. You know, I'm not sure you should accompany me. We can just chat a bit near the cafe. Do you think I'm a little boy? So I'll stand near the cafe and chat with the beauty? No, thank you. How about I take you to a restaurant, and we can spend time there? Thanks, but definitely not. It's better to accompany me home, but I warn you, I live far away. Don't worry about it, I've got a car." Before long, Ramona was already sitting in Alejandro's car, and he was smiling while telling her about himself. The man explained that he was 31 years old and lived separately in a 2-room apartment from his mother. His father passed away last year. Alex himself is a self-employed entrepreneur. He was married at some point, but life didn't work out, leading to a divorce. He didn't have children from the marriage. Then the man mentioned that Eduardo was his best friend. There was another friend named Valeriano. Towards the end of his narrative, Alejandro added that he loves gourmet dishes and going to horse races. When the girl heard about horse races, she looked at her acquaintance with surprise. Seeing the girl's expression, Alejandro immediately asked what was unusual about what he said. Ramona, embarrassed, mentioned that she had never been to a horse race. Alejandro smiled and said, "Well, then I know where our first date will take place. I'll take you to the racetrack. Combine business with pleasure, as they say. Let's go this Sunday, that's tomorrow. I have a working day on Sunday, so I can't. We'll settle the work issue right now. You probably forgot that Eduardo is my best friend." And with these words, the man took out his cell phone and called his friend. Alejandro explained the situation and then asked to give the girl an unscheduled day off. In response, the friend laughed and said he gave his approval. After the call, Alex looked at Ramona and said with a smile, "Now you see how quickly all your problems are solved in my presence." "I see." Laughing, the girl said and added, "We've already arrived. It's time to say goodbye. You also need to go home. I'd still like to talk to you, but I see you're tired after a working day, and keeping you any longer would be selfish on my part. So, let me kiss your elegant hand, and you can run home." The girl extended her hand to the man, and he gently touched her palm with his lips. Ramona felt shivers running down her body from this touch. She had never experienced such close contact with a man. Alejandro pressed his lips against her hand for a few moments and then released the girl's hand. Ramona suddenly felt that she blushed and quickly opened the car door, jumping out of the car without even saying goodbye to her new acquaintance. When the girl entered her apartment, she walked to the window, hoping the car would still be there, but it was already gone. Disappointed, she sighed and headed to the bathroom to take a shower. Standing under the water, she recalled the conversation with Alejandro, then his touch on her hand. Afterward, her thoughts shifted to tomorrow's date at the racetrack. Suddenly, it struck her like an electric shock. They didn't discuss the time she needed to leave home. And they didn't exchange phone numbers. Annoyed, she bit her lower lip. She didn't know how to fix the situation now. The next morning, Ramona woke up in a terrible mood. She understood that the date wouldn't happen because she wouldn't spend the whole day guarding Alejandro before his departure. The girl tried not to think about the meeting that wouldn't take place, but the thoughts kept returning. And every now and then, she found herself approaching the window. As it approached 2 o'clock, the phone rang. Ramona looked at the number. It was unfamiliar to her. She answered and instantly recognized Alejandro's voice, which kindly said, "You rushed away so swiftly yesterday, I didn't even get a chance to know your phone number. But you're calling me right now," happily exclaimed the girl. "Of course, I had to pull strings with Eduardo again. He, as a true leader, has the phone numbers of his staff. So, we're wasting time. In short, you have just over an hour to get ready. Then, as soon as I arrive, I'll call you, and you'll come out." "Okay, deal." The girl disconnected and laughed cheerfully. At that moment, she was happy. She really liked this man, and she wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. She even involuntarily thought that perhaps this person could be her significant other in life. Soon, the young people were at the racetrack. The girl was watching the race and asked many questions of her companion. The young man answered with a smile. Once the race was over, the girl asked the man how often he went to races. Alejandro admitted that it varied. He explained that it all depended on circumstances. After the racetrack, the young people went for a ride. They were chatting on various topics in the meantime. The girl enjoyed the time with the guy. She wished this day wouldn't end. She felt so good at that moment. However, Alejandro, closer to 9 p.m., dropped Ramona off at home and said it was time for him to leave because he had to get up early for work the next day. The companion barely held back a sigh of disappointment. And, like yesterday, the man kissed the girl's hand again, and she felt the same sensation as the day before. Ramona came home and thought she would have 2 days off now. She really hoped to spend these days with Alejandro. But during this time, the man never called once. Ramona was disappointed and thought that, apparently, he didn't like her behavior. And now, the working day has come. She came to work, and her first visitor was Alejandro. Ramona, seeing him, didn't know what to think. He beckoned her over and asked only for a cup of coffee. The girl fulfilled the man's request and was about to leave when Alex said, "Sit down. There's a bartender, he'll handle the role of the waiter. I want to tell you that you won't work here anymore." "What do you mean?" the interlocutor asked in confusion. "You've been on my mind these days. I don't know how to express myself in love, but I'm insanely drawn to you. I'll be more concise. I suggest we start living together." But we don't know each other at all. No, this doesn't suit me. Well, what kind of people are you, women? You want all relationships to go through a marriage agency. Alejandro said with a slightly noticeable irritation and then added, well, you haven't been a little girl for a long time, and you know perfectly well that you need to get to know each other not only in conversation but also in bed. And only then will we formalize the relationship. But here, you are mistaken. Maybe you've had a bunch of girls, and you're well read in those very bedroom scenes. As for me, I can say that I'm innocent in this matter. And I don't want you to use me and then discard me like an unwanted toy. After these words, Alejandro looked at the girl in surprise. The man clearly didn't expect such a response. Meanwhile, the girl stood up. Her face was red with anger. She was about to leave when he grabbed her hand and asked her to sit. Ramona reluctantly complied and looked questioningly at the young man, who said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that, at your age, all the girls know a lot about delicate matters. Not everyone. For instance, I don't, just so you know. You've described yourself incorrectly. You are a virtuous maiden, which is a rarity in our time. I am deeply impressed that such a beautiful girl has not had any real relationships with a guy. I now understand your anger. Okay, I'll be your boyfriend for a week, and we'll see how our relationship will develop. If we continue to be drawn to each other, I'll make you an official proposal, and we'll have a wedding. Did I say that I'm drawn to you? Don't complicate everything. Admit that you're drawn to me. I felt it when I kissed your hand. Just don't play hard to get it because it doesn't suit you. Honestly, answer me, what draws you to me? Well, yes. Can we change the subject now? The girl said, already annoyed with herself. Agreed. Another topic, your job. I don't want my girl to work as a waitress. But I'm not specifically your girl. And I need money, you know that. I'll provide you with finances for the room and meals. And don't forget that if everything goes well between us, we will soon become husband and wife. And I don't like it when my wife works. I want a beautiful woman to greet me at home in a good mood and not tired. Can I at least work this week? Okay. And then not a day longer. A week passed. Alejandro, when Ramona was working, picked her up from the cafe and drove her home. The man called her every day and consistently asked how she spent the day when he didn't come. The girl happily reported that she was studying a culinary book. After a week, the man made a formal proposal to the girl, which she accepted with delight. And after that, as her chosen one insisted, Ramona resigned from her job. About her engagement, the girl initially told her mother, who was overjoyed that her daughter had found her beloved. Afterward, Ramona called her friend and also told her about her upcoming marriage. Lina warmly congratulated her friend and solemnly promised to attend the wedding. Soon, Ramona had the opportunity to meet her future mother-in-law, who lived in a 3-room apartment. Marga Alvarez turned out to be a gracious woman who warmly welcomed the girl at their first meeting. Ramona was pleased that she and her lover's mother had established friendly relations from the very beginning. Later, the girl also met her chosen one's third friend. He was a young man of 27 named Valeriano. Alejandro's friend immediately appreciated the girl's beauty and told his friend that if he had known that such a charming waitress as Ramona worked at Eduardo's place, he would have visited much earlier than Alejandro. Ramona appreciated Valeriano's compliment, but her chosen one scowled at his friend. When there were 2 weeks left until the wedding, the girl hinted that it was necessary to visit her mother so that Alejandro could meet his future mother-in-law. The man reluctantly accepted the girl's suggestion, but he understood that it had to be done. One day, the young couple went to the village. When Alejandro found himself a guest at Wanda's house, he subtly wrinkled his nose with disgust. Ramona happily introduced her fiancé to her mother and then helped her mom set the festive table. Meanwhile, Alex examined the surroundings. When the table was set, the hostess invited her dear guest. The future son-in-law sat down and looked at the dishes in front of him, then quietly said, Is this considered a festive treat? Fried potatoes with mushrooms, a plate of cheap boiled sausage, pickles from a jar, and a couple of salads that rational housewives usually prepare for the winter stock? Ramona felt uncomfortable with her chosen one expressing himself so critically about the festive table. She looked at Alejandro and whispered that her mom couldn't afford much. The lover also whispered back that they could have at least fried some chicken. The hostess heard this dialogue clearly and said, "No need to whisper, I hear everything perfectly. Alejandro, I understand that you're probably accustomed to more sophisticated dishes, but everything here is simple. I don't keep chickens, and I don't want to buy them in the store because who knows what they're fed with. You could buy from the neighbors, but they sell at an unreasonably high price. And there's one more circumstance. I think your bride told you that her brother is in prison. So, I'm slowly saving up because the place is not close. We need to go north, and tickets are quite expensive nowadays. Therefore, my dear, don't be angry with me for such a careless table. Mom, don't worry, everything is fine. Alex will now try your potatoes, and you won't be able to pull him away in bulk. He just doesn't know how wonderfully you cook," exclaimed Ramona, who, with a serious expression, looked at her chosen one. So, he leisurely took a spoon and served himself some potatoes. After that, Ramona handed him a fork and looked meaningfully at him. Alejandro took the fork and ate a little of the potatoes. Afterward, he smiled tensely and said, "I probably rushed to criticize everything. These potatoes are simply divine. I'll be happy if my wife cooks this product so deliciously." After this statement, Wanda smiled and began asking the future son-in-law questions about the wedding. Alejandro answered, occasionally glancing at his watch. The homeowner noticed this and asked how long the couple would stay. The guest politely replied that they would head home in a couple of hours. Wanda sighed with disappointment. The elderly woman hoped they would spend the night together. Moreover, she was eager to gossip with her daughter, which she openly mentioned. Seeing that her beloved was no longer eating, Ramona suggested he watch TV while she helped her mom clear the table. When alone with her mother, the girl immediately apologized for her fiancé's behavior. In response, the mother smiled and said, "Nothing to worry about, your young man spoke the truth. It would have been much worse if he had done it behind our backs." Alex expressed his opinion. But still, he was wrong. "You better tell me, how long have you known him? How well do you know him?" "We've been acquainted for about a month and a half, but it feels like I've known him all my life," the daughter replied with a smile. "And why do you want to marry him so quickly after such a short period? Is it because you're expecting a child?" "Mom, there's been nothing between us yet, except for a couple of kisses. I even live in a rented apartment. We agreed that everything would happen after the wedding. And we both want to live together, so we're rushing with the wedding. I'm just sorry that my brother won't be at the wedding. But he knows everything and wishes me happiness. If everything is so good between you and Alex, then I'm happy for you and wholeheartedly bless you." Soon, the young couple left the village. On the way to the city, Ramona told her fiancé that he behaved rudely towards her mother. Alejandro frowned and irritably said that he didn't expect to see such poor living conditions. The girl looked angrily at her companion and asked him not to speak about her mother's home in that tone. The man looked at his beloved and then chuckled quietly, saying, "How beautiful you are in your anger right now. I would kiss you all over like that. Well, don't be angry with me." Time passed, and the wedding day arrived. There were many people on the groom's side whom the girl didn't know. On Ramona's side, only her mother, friend, and the girl she shared an apartment with were present. Immediately after the wedding, Ramona moved in with her husband. The girl eagerly began to settle into her new place, wanting their apartment to be cozy and comfortable. Ramona also didn't forget that her husband was very picky about food. Therefore, she often browsed a cooking website to find interesting dishes to prepare for her spouse for dinner. Sometimes she had questions about cooking. In these cases, she called Eduardo, the chef, for advice. Time flew by, and it was approaching the moment when the girl wanted to enroll in college again. The day before, she mentioned it to her husband. Alejandro looked at his wife in surprise and asked why she needed to tackle the hardships of education. Ramona responded with confusion. "I need to have an education. Am I supposed to go through life uneducated?" "Dear, tone down your wild imagination. Other girls dream of living without doing anything, and you talk about some studies. You better always look the way you are. It's so pleasant to be with you. I hear from many that I snagged a diamond, and it's all about you. And Valeriano still swoons over you. He can't get over not meeting you before me. Sometimes I feel like you married not me but my appearance. But let's seriously talk about education. Do you really think I enjoy depending on you and not having money for extra expenses? You'll have a job soon. I have some plans, but they're still in progress. And about education, I told you seriously, it's all nonsense. Better study the cookbook. It will come in handy for you soon." Ramona realized that she would have to forget about education. The young woman didn't want to conflict with her husband over this. So, she decided to stay at home for now and be an exemplary wife and a good homemaker. Another 6 months passed. During this time, the girl's mother visited her son in prison, and Ramona's friend got married to a businessman. The friends still frequently called each other and shared news. Lina often asked her friend when she would have her first child. Ramona had to lie to her friend all the time, saying it wasn't the right time, although, in reality, she dreamed of becoming a mother. But her husband was against it. He said they needed to stand on their feet financially before thinking about children. For this reason, the man even made his chosen one take contraceptive pills. Several more months passed. Ramona, sitting at home, was watching a women's program. Then they showed a happy mother who gave birth to triplets. The young woman involuntarily teared up with tenderness. And at that moment, her husband came home from work. He looked at his wife in surprise and asked what had happened. The young woman wiped away her tears and said, "We've been living together for 2 years now, and I want us to have a complete family. I want us to have a child. Again, you started this nonsense. Do you need it? It won't be easy for you later, diapers, sleepless nights, and all that. I know all about it. I'm ready for these challenges. I just miss you when you're away at work until the evening. Well, in your free time, learn to knit. It's a great activity. You'll still have work, I promise you." The girl realized that talking to her husband about children was pointless. So, she decided to deceitfully get pregnant. The young woman stopped taking contraceptive measures, and after a while, she realized she was pregnant. To confirm her suspicions, Ramona visited a women's consultation where the doctor congratulated her on the upcoming addition to the family. The young woman was excited while flying home. Now she was thinking about how to tell her husband the news. Ramona waited for her husband to return from work, trying to come up with various ways to break the news to her betrothed. When Alejandro entered the house, she simply said in the corridor, "I'm pregnant. I went to the doctor today." "But how could this happen? You were taking pills." "Yes, I asked the doctor the same thing, but he told me that there can be glitches in the body, and the pills didn't have the desired effect." "Well, that's what happened. So, we need to terminate the pregnancy," the husband said dryly. "It's too late. The time for that has passed." "Don't worry, my dear, we'll manage," the young woman said affectionately. "Of course, we'll manage. Soon, you'll be as big as a cow, and no dress will fit you," the man said irritably. Time marched on. Ramona's pregnancy went smoothly, and soon, the young woman gave birth to a girl named Ariel. Ramona was very happy about this event. Now, she was not only a wife, but also a mother. Years passed, and Ariel turned 3. Ramona began to consider sending her daughter to kindergarten. She wanted the child to interact with peers, and she discussed this with her husband. Alejandro was not against it and agreed with his betrothed's opinion. As soon as Ariel started going to kindergarten, Ramona started talking to her chosen one about work. Alejandro didn't like such conversations because he was fine with his wife staying at home, waiting for him after a day's work. However, this time, his beloved was persistent in this matter and told her husband, "Whether you like it or not, I will start looking for a job. I don't like having to ask you for money all the time. Can you not talk to me in that tone? I've told you more than once that I'd help you with that. Just wait another year. I've saved up some money, and I want to open a restaurant business. I see how Eduardo has thrived in this business. He has already opened a restaurant, and I'm still stuck in one place. But you don't understand anything about this business." The wife said in surprise and then added, "It's better to invest money in something you know well. In your case, it's auto repair shops. I'll understand with time." Moreover, Eduardo, as a friend, promised to help. "I didn't just tell you to learn from the cookbook. You will be the administrator of the restaurant we'll open." After this conversation with her husband, Ramona felt encouraged. She shared this news with her mother and then with her friend. The young woman also informed her mother-in-law, with whom she often met. Marga always warmly welcomed her daughter-in-law and rejoiced when Ramona visited her with her granddaughter. And once again, when the daughter-in-law came to her mother-in-law, the hostess turned to the young woman. "Your mother and I often talk, and when we talk about you, she often calls you Rami. Tell me, doesn't that offend you?" "Not at all. My mom calls me that with love. I even like it a lot when she says it." "Well, then, I'll call you Rami too. You are like a daughter to me. Visit me more often with Ariel, I get so bored. And my son, with his business, always has no time." "Okay, Mom, I'll try to visit you more often. And I'll persuade Alejandro to do it too, not just once a month." A couple more years passed. Alejandro opened the restaurant, and Ramona was overjoyed because now she wouldn't have to sit at home doing nothing. However, her husband said that in the beginning, he would hire an experienced administrator and she would have to learn from him. Ramona didn't argue with her husband, as over the years of married life, she had not become accustomed to contradicting him. About a year passed. The restaurant hardly generated any income. Alejandro understood that if things continued this way, he would simply go bankrupt. He started coming home in a bad mood. He realized that he needed to change the concept of the restaurant business. His wife saw how frustrated he was and often told him to seek help from his friend. Alex replied, "Eduardo suggests doing a major renovation here and completely changing the menu to something simpler to prepare. I agree with the menu, it's easy to do. But for the renovation, you need a fortune. And where will I get it? Although you can take out a loan." "Exactly, that's what I'll do." After some time, Alejandro took out a large loan from the bank. The restaurant was closed for renovation, which lasted more than a month. New furniture and equipment were purchased. Ramona had been watching all this time as her husband enthusiastically worked on the restaurant. She hoped that after all these changes, the establishment would start making a profit. And now, the day came when the restaurant reopened. Many advertisements were placed in the newspaper that there was a new restaurant in town with an excellent menu for every taste. Alejandro immediately invited his friends to celebrate the opening of the establishment. He expected many visitors on this day and, like his wife, hoped that the revenue would now increase many times over. After the reopening of the restaurant, a week passed, but customer attendance was low. Alejandro was furious about this. He simply didn't know what to do. The man was raging, and Ramona didn't know how to help her husband. In secret, she went to Eduardo and asked how to improve the situation. The friend of her husband replied, "I initially told Alex that this was a doomed venture. You can see where the restaurant is located. The elite live there, and rich people won't deliberately go there. When Alex wanted to open a restaurant there, I immediately told him that he needed to either make a canteen or a cheap eatery. But you know your husband. If he sticks to something, you won't budge him. Maybe you could talk to him again? You'd see how he's tormented." I can't stand to see him like this without crying. My words mean nothing to him, you understand that too. My advice to you is to try to persuade him to sell this restaurant to have something to pay off the loan. Okay, thanks for the advice. As soon as Ramona mentioned selling the restaurant, she immediately provoked a storm of indignation from her husband. He shouted at her for the first time and rudely told her not to interfere in his affairs. After the unsuccessful conversation, the young woman took her daughter and, almost in tears, went to her mother-in-law. Coming to Marga, Ramona told her about the quarrel with her husband. The apartment owner asked her future daughter-in-law to calm down and offered to stay overnight at her place. The daughter-in-law refused the offer, knowing that her husband would not approve of such a move, and she told her mother-in-law about it. Marga volunteered to call her son and immediately dialed his number. Alex, you know, I would like Ramona and Ariel to stay overnight at my place today. What kind of nonsense is this? She's a married woman and should be with her husband. I'll come for her right now. Son, I know you have problems with your business, and now you're taking it out on Ramona. Let her rest for just one day with me. I'm on my way. The man said harshly and hung up the phone. Alejandro was at his mother's place in about 40 minutes. He entered the apartment and, not hesitating in front of his mother, sternly told his wife that he wouldn't allow their disputes to be taken outside the home. In response to this, Ramona said that she had come to her mother-in-law to have a heart-to-heart talk and discuss their problems. Alejandro replied to this. What is happening in our family should only be between us. That is between me and you, and there is no need to involve mothers in this. Did you understand everything? Yes. The young woman said fearfully. After this incident, Ramona realized that she didn't fully know her own husband. Somewhere deep inside, she even became afraid of him. The woman had been dreaming that life with her husband would return to its usual course, where they rejoiced every day. Some time passed. Alejandro returned from the restaurant in a gloomy mood, and as if by a twist of fate, it was necessary to pay off the loan, but there were no finances. The income from the auto repair shop did not cover all the expenses, and the revenue from the restaurant was utterly meager. Banks began to call the man frequently, demanding repayment of the loan. When someone called again, Alex answered. After hanging up, he turned to his wife. It's all settled. We need to sell the restaurant before it's too late. I haven't been able to pay the staff for 2 months now. There's no point in continuing this business if it doesn't bring in any income. I'm very glad you came to this decision. The wife, who was actually delighted with her husband's words, responded warmly. Alejandro soon sold the restaurant, and the proceeds from the sale went to pay off the bank loan. Once this happened, Ramona sighed in relief as her husband stopped getting nervous about the failed business. However, the young woman still secretly dreamed of working. But she realized that her fiancé would crush her desire. That's when Ramona found a way out. She started earning money online. She performed simple tasks on social media, earning a small income. 2 months after selling the restaurant, Alejandro came home in a dejected state. Ramona inquired sympathetically about what had happened to her husband. Trying to hide his irritation, he replied that he had been at Eduardo's, and things were going excellently for him. The wife was surprised by her lover's words and said, "You should be happy that everything is going well for your friend in this regard. Don't you understand that I also want to ride high on the horse, not pick up scraps from the table? Are you really envious of Eduardo?" Ramona unexpectedly asked, surprised by this revelation. It's a complicated question. Perhaps deep down there is some envy, but we still need additional income. It's time to move into more luxurious apartments. I mean, we need to buy a 3-room apartment and sell this one. There's only one way, to open another auto repair shop. Well, where will you get the money? Are you going to take out another loan? No. The man categorically replied and added, I don't want to deal with banks anymore. We need to come up with something else. After this conversation, a month passed, and one morning, when her husband went to work, Ramona turned on the laptop. She was about to take on a task on social media when the phone rang. The woman picked up the phone and heard her neighbor's excited voice, who lived across from her mother. She reported that Wanda had been taken to the hospital with a heart attack. Ramona gasped in fear and immediately called her husband. As soon as Alejandro answered, she quickly delivered the sad news and asked him to take her to the hospital. The husband, with a hint of annoyance, asked, "And how long are you planning to stay there?" "Until Mom gets better. I can go with Ariel or leave her with your mom, it's up to you. I'll only allow my daughter to go to the village. There's no need to burden my mother with a child." "As you wish, dear," replied the girl, smiling. She understood from her husband's words that Alejandro still envied her and, therefore, didn't want to let her go alone. After some time, Ramona was already sitting by her mother's side, who was lying in the hospital bed. The young woman stroked Wanda's hand and spoke tenderly, assuring her that everything would be fine. The sick woman looked at her daughter and asked her not to worry. In response, Ramona nodded and said that she needed to call her brother and inform him about their mother's illness. The young woman didn't even suspect that with her call, Mariano would bring trouble to himself. Several days passed. Ramona returned home from the hospital to her mother. Suddenly, 2 police cars overtook her. At that moment, she was wondering what had happened in their village if so many law enforcement officers had arrived. To her surprise, the car stopped near her mother's house. Ramona approached the uninvited guests and asked, "What happened?" "We need Wanda Ibanez," said a stern-looking man in uniform. "She's in the hospital. I'm her daughter. Mariano escaped from prison and injured one of our officers in the process. We are looking for him." "Was he here?" "No. He wanted to visit Mom, so he did this." The young woman said it barely audibly and felt that something was wrong. Meanwhile, the interlocutor asked to open the house for inspection. At that moment, a signal sounded on his radio. The man answered and, a few moments later, reported that the operation to find the escaped criminal was over since Mariano was caught. After that, Ramona followed into the house, where she burst into desperate tears. She realized perfectly well that her brother had escaped just to visit their mother. Mariano was afraid that their mother wouldn't survive until he got out of prison. Ramona also understood that her brother would now face additional charges for the escape. The woman knew that this news should never be told to her mother, who, with her weak heart, might not survive the sad news. Some time passed, and now Ramona's mother has been discharged. Wanda asked her daughter to live with Ariel at her place for some more time. Ramona couldn't refuse her mother's request, although her husband called every day, asking when she would finally return home. After a few days of Wanda being discharged, Alejandro knew about it. Once again, the wife asked for one more day to stay with her mom, but he disconnected the call. After a while, he came to the village himself. The man politely greeted his mother-in-law and, in a commanding tone, ordered his wife to come home. Ramona understood that her husband was angry with her for the prolonged absence, and he missed her. In a short time, the family returned to the city, and life resumed its usual course. However, just a month after Ramona returned from the village, she began to feel uncomfortable. Her body was constantly itching, and this did not escape Alejandro's notice. He said to his wife, "Well, you lived with your mother in that old shack and probably caught scabies. Go to the doctor's tomorrow." Ramona didn't object to her husband's words because, in reality, she felt awful. She went to the doctor, who prescribed a bunch of tests. Soon came the diagnosis. The doctor said she had diabetes. Ramona looked at the doctor in amazement and asked, "But it has never been in our family. You yourself said that lately you've had a lot of unpleasant experiences. You've developed diabetes due to stress. And now you need to go to the hospital for a complete examination." Ramona returned home in a depressed state. She had no desire to lie in a hospital bed. She informed her husband about her illness, who was not thrilled with the news. Alejandro immediately said that his wife shouldn't have lingered and should have gone to the hospital. The woman nodded in agreement and said, "Okay. But now it will be hard for you because you'll have to take Ariel to and from daycare. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. Soon, Ramona was admitted to the hospital. She stayed there for about 2 weeks. At the time of her discharge, the doctor handed her a prescription and explained how to take the medications. The doctor also advised the girl to worry as little as possible. Ramona would have been happy to live without worries, but then her daughter had an appendicitis attack. The girl was urgently hospitalized, and Ramona was worried about her daughter's condition. Only after Ariel was discharged did the woman feel unwell again and end up back in the hospital. 7 months passed since Ramona learned about her illness. During this time, she gained a little weight because she was taking hormonal drugs. While some acquaintances told her that the extra kilograms only added charm to her figure, Alejandro sarcastically remarked that she was slowly turning into a cow. After these words, Ramona burst into tears, and her husband, trying to soften his abruptness in some way, said, "No need for tears. I just ask you not to gain more weight and to monitor your weight. And now I want to share joyful news with you. I will have a second auto repair shop in a week, and we will soon move to a 3-room apartment. I've already found a buyer for this apartment." "But where did you get the money?" asked the chosen one in amazement. "You need to know the right places. In the meantime, start packing your things slowly." And soon Alejandro opened his second auto repair shop, and the family moved into a 3-room apartment. The move to a new place of residence was a big challenge for Ramona. She was nervous about everything, whether she would get along with the neighbors, whether they would live too far from her mother-in-law, and whether her daughter would have to go to 1st grade. Due to this move, she wouldn't be able to enroll her child in school on time. As a result, the woman ended up back in the hospital. And when her husband came to visit her, she asked him, "Let your mother help you with Ariel. With your business now, you don't have time for household chores. Invite Marga to live with us while I'm not there. I won't call my mom. Moreover, she was going to leave. I'll handle this situation myself, and Ariel will be fine. Don't worry about our daughter." "Where is she going?" "She didn't tell me anything." "True, I haven't called her for a long time about this move. Please don't bother your mom at this time. Once you're discharged, I'll take you to her myself." "Agreed?" "I won't object, as you say, my dear." Ramona was discharged after some time. She came home and was pleased to note that the apartment was in order. The woman turned to her husband and affectionately said she was proud of him. Alejandro, in turn, handed his chosen one a notebook and told her to start recording the calories she consumes each day. Ramona looked at her husband in surprise and said he was out of his mind. Alejandro stepped aside, then gestured towards the mirror and suggested his wife look at herself in it. The woman complied with her husband's request and looked at him again. Seeing that his life companion was puzzled, he said, "You've gained a couple more extra kilograms that don't suit you anymore. Do I really have to explain the obvious to you? I don't understand. Do you love me, or is only my figure important to you?" "Both. So let's stop this meaningless dialogue." After these words, Ramona locked herself in the bathroom and cried for a long time. She hated herself for gaining extra weight and decided that she urgently needed to work on her figure without feeling sorry for herself. Only after these thoughts could the woman calm down and leave the bathroom. The next day, Ramona got up early in the morning while her husband and daughter were still asleep. She weighed herself, recorded the weight in the notebook, and then did her morning exercises. While doing the exercises, she mentally encouraged herself, not only for her beloved but also for her health. After that, Ramona saw her husband off to work and took her daughter to school. She then started studying the calorie table. The woman decided that she would cook separately for herself and only with low-calorie products. She created a menu and put it in a visible place in the kitchen. Several days passed. Ramona continued to exercise every morning and cook separately for herself and her family. She believed that she could succeed and regain her previous figure. When a week had passed, Ramona stepped on the scales and was horrified to notice that she had only lost 260 grams during this time. She was disappointed with the result and decided to talk to her mother-in-law. Ramona called Marga, but the subscriber was out of reach. When her husband came home from work, she told him that she had tried to call her mother but couldn't. After hearing this, Alejandro looked directly at his wife and calmly informed her that his mom had moved to another country. Ramona looked astonished at her husband and said, "How can this be? Why didn't she say goodbye? Why didn't you tell me anything? It's a long story, be patient. Once she settles down, she will definitely call you. She just got a new suitor, and he suggested moving to his homeland." She agreed. Besides, Mom doesn't have to justify her actions to us. She's an adult. That's not the point. It's not about Marga having to justify herself to us, exclaimed the young woman indignantly. She wiped away the tears that had welled up with her hand and continued, "It's entirely different. We got along so well, and she secretly left without saying a word to us. It's not fair to relatives. That's what I'm talking about now. Calm down. I explained to you that she had compelling reasons to do so. Let's just close this topic. Besides, you have a hungry husband returning from work, and he wants to eat like a wolf." Ramona had no choice but to silently go to the kitchen, set the table, and feed her husband. She did all this mechanically, as her thoughts were occupied by her mother-in-law's actions. She couldn't believe that Marga had acted in such a way. Ramona was simply hurt that her mother-in-law had treated her and Ariel like this. A month had passed since Ramona had been trying to lose weight, and now she has decided to check her weight after this period. The woman was standing on the scales and froze in confusion. She saw that, after all her efforts, she had lost only 1 kilogram. Ramona didn't believe the result at first and quickly went to the nearest clinic, where she asked to be weighed. However, the nurse confirmed the result that Ramona had on her home scales. The woman walked home in despair. After all, she had exhausted herself so much that she often ate less, watching her family enjoy baked chicken and eat ice cream. Ramona tried to leave the kitchen during those moments to avoid temptation, and all these hardships were for just 1 kilogram. She was about to give up the weight loss attempt when the idea came to her that she needed to see a dietitian to have a specialist create a diet suitable for her with diabetes. Now, Ramona has a new menu from the doctor. The woman diligently starts a new attempt to lose extra kilograms. She strictly adhered to the menu and also did exercises for 15 minutes every morning. Exactly a month later, Ramona stepped on the scales. Seeing the result, she ran to the kitchen, angrily tearing off the sheet with the menu, as she had lost 720 grams during this period. When her husband came that day, she complained to him that another month had passed in vain, as she had lost very little weight. Alejandro smirked and arrogantly said that she wasn't trying hard enough. Ramona felt a wave of resentment. She wanted to respond sharply to her husband, but immediately changed her mind, realizing that the conversation could turn into a scandal. And she didn't want that. The next morning, as usual, Ramona accompanied her husband to work, took her daughter to school, and called her friend. She shared her problem and how it was affecting her relationship with her spouse. Lina listened to her friend and advised her to run far away from such a lover. Through tears, Ramona replied to her friend, "It's easy for you to say, but where do I go? Back to the village, to my mom? And watch the village guys, every other one of them getting drunk. Yes, it's not even about that, it's that I love Alejandro. You're talking just like your mom, who endured beatings from her husband for the sake of such love. What else can I advise you on? You know, I don't even know what to say in this situation. Personally, if it were me, I've seen you and Ariel in photos, you look perfectly decent. I won't argue that you've gained a bit of weight, but you've become more feminine. Thank you for listening, and I am sorry for dumping my problems on you. Say hi to your family for me. Don't disappear, and call me in any situation. Anything is possible in our lives, so if there are difficulties financially or anything else, call me right away. Some time passed. Ramona sat at home with her daughter, helping her with homework. Alejandro came home and informed his wife that he would not be coming home alone on the weekend, but with a wealthy client. He asked his wife to prepare a festive dinner and emphasized to her that it was crucial to convince the guest to visit his workshop. The chosen one did not ask unnecessary questions and promised her husband to set an exquisite table. Sunday arrived, and Alejandro came home with a man dressed in an expensive suit. The head of the family invited the guest into the living room, where the table was set with numerous dishes. Sasha looked at the treats and smiled. He was pleased that his wife had fulfilled his request. Meanwhile, the guest also appreciated the dishes and said, "Your wife cooks excellently," and after these words, the man looked at Ramona, who was standing modestly aside. The guest clicked his tongue and said, "Your chosen one is excellent in every way." Alejandro clearly didn't like the client's last remark, and he sternly asked his wife to leave them alone for a while. Then, the host brought a small bottle of white and suggested having 100 grams each to start the conversation. The guest smiled broadly and nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Ramona was in the children's room with Ariel. She felt uncomfortable being dismissed from the room by her husband, as if she were ordinary help. After some time, the woman heard her betrothed calling her with an intoxicated voice. Ramona hurried into the living room and saw that the guest and her chosen one were already quite drunk. She asked what her husband wanted from her, and he, in turn, skeptically smiled and asked her to clear the table, adding, "You can gather the leftovers and take them to your mother in the village. She'll be thrilled with your gift of scraps." Ramona didn't respond to her husband because she understood that it would be useless at the moment. She decided to talk about it in the morning. And as soon as the next day arrived, the woman turned to her husband. "What do you think you're doing? Okay, you insult me, but my mother has nothing to do with it. You're starting to look like a village cow, so I'm using those words. But then why don't you divorce me if you hate me so much? You cook well, and don't forget we have a daughter. Although, if you want, I can deprive you of motherhood, and you can go to your village. You're out of your mind. Aren't you ashamed?" exclaimed the wife with tears in her eyes and hurried to leave the room to avoid seeing her betrothed. Only now did she realize that her husband didn't value her at all. It was at that moment that she inexplicably remembered her mother-in-law, Marga. Ramona herself didn't understand what led her to think about Marga. Unnoticed, 2 weeks passed. During this time, Ramona realized that the relationship between her and her husband had cooled. She tried to preserve the family union. She even visited a sorceress to help her regain her husband's love. Ramona performed a mysterious ritual, but it yielded no results. Alejandro could still easily offend his wife. The woman was desperate, and after yet another insult from her husband, she decided to tell her mother the truth about her life with her betrothed. Until then, Ramona had hidden everything from her mom, not wanting to burden her unnecessarily. She was afraid for Wanda's fragile heart. Soon, Ramona sat at her mother's house, tearfully telling her about her relationship with her spouse. The elderly woman silently listened to her daughter, and as soon as she finished speaking, she said sadly, "If it's so bad with Alex, why don't you leave him? I still love him. I just think I need to wait a bit, and everything between us will get better. You see how it turns out. You asked me back then why I live with your father when he treats me so badly. And I told you that I love him. And now you're saying the same words to me. Sweetheart, believe me, Alex won't change, and you just have to endure it since you love him so much." Some more time passed. Ramona clearly realized that the old family relationship couldn't be restored. Also, she learned that her husband had a mistress on the side. The woman understood that she needed to leave her spouse, and so one day she told him this. When Alejandro heard about it, he laughed and said she could roll in any direction she wanted and forget about Ariel. Ramona looked at her husband in horror and realized that he wasn't joking but might turn his words into reality. In that moment, Ramona decided to steer the conversation in a different direction. She asked her betrothed about his mother. As soon as Alejandro heard the question, he involuntarily flinched. The woman noticed this movement, and his reaction put her on edge. Meanwhile, the betrothed hastened to reply that his mother would call soon. Unsatisfied with Alex's response, she decided to visit her mother-in-law at the old address. Soon, Ramona found herself on the landing where Marga used to live. Lost in thought, she was startled as the door suddenly opened and Marga's neighbor stepped out. Ramona immediately addressed the pensioner. "I came to visit Marga. I know that she moved." "Wait. You're her daughter-in-law, right? Didn't your husband tell you he placed his mother in a nursing home?" "Alex told me that his mother left with a companion to live abroad," Ramona said with confusion. "Nonsense. Honestly. Come to my place, I'll tell you something." The two women entered the apartment and walked into the living room. Ramona sat in one of the armchairs, and the pensioner sat on the couch nearby. The hostess of the apartment explained that lately Marga has been struggling with high blood pressure and deteriorating health. The elderly woman was afraid to be alone, and that's when Alex suggested his mother live in an expensive nursing home. Marga agreed, and soon her son arranged it for her. After listening to the neighbor's story, Ramona was stunned by the news. She immediately asked the elderly woman, "But what about the apartment? Some strangers live there now." As Marga told me, her son would rent it out temporarily while she was in the nursing home. But, as I later found out, the apartment was sold, not rented. That's all I know. Now tell me, where is Marga? You probably took her in? Yes, Ramona lied. At the moment, she wanted to be alone and think everything through, so she added, "Forgive me, but I have to run urgently. School lessons are over, and I need to pick up my daughter. Thank you for the news." Exiting the neighbor's place onto the street, Ramona sat on a bench and contemplated. She couldn't understand why, if her mother-in-law was in a nursing home, she hadn't called. All of this seemed strange to her, and she decided she needed to uncover the truth on her own. And soon, Ramona began to take action. About a month passed, and Alejandro's birthday celebration was approaching. Ramona knew that her husband's friends and the people important to him would attend the party. She had already bought groceries in preparation for the festive dinner. And so, the day came. Guests, led by the birthday celebrant Alejandro, joyfully celebrated the birthday. Time flew by unnoticed, and the conclusion of the celebration was approaching. Alejandro playfully beckoned his wife over, and with sarcasm, he uttered words that humiliated her in front of their friends. "Fatty, gather the leftovers from the table. Treat your mom from the countryside." The guests laughed, except for Valeriano, who still held a soft spot for Ramona. He addressed the apartment owner, noting that his wife was in great shape. Alejandro was about to say something to his friend when Ramona interrupted him, turning to Valeriano. "Thank you for stepping in, but right now, I can stand up for myself." After these words, she turned to her husband and coldly smiled, saying, "You're right, I'll gather these scraps and feed my mother and yours, the one you've disowned." "What nonsense are you talking?" Alejandro growled fiercely. "Well, let me tell you and your guests about what a respectable person you are in society. I think you've spun tales, claiming that your mother left with a lover abroad. But that never happened. You manipulated everyone, and now it's time for everyone to know the truth. By the way, your mom should be here in half an hour to congratulate her diligent son. And by that time, I'll share more about you. Shut up, or I can't vouch for myself," Alejandro menacingly said, rising from his chair. But Valeriano immediately stood up for Ramona, stating, "Don't lose your temper, Alex. You know very well that your mother was like a second mother to us, Eduardo and me. And it's essential for us to know the truth. Let Ramona speak." Ramona looked at Valeriano with gratitude, then turned to her husband. She saw the rage in his eyes. Ramona was well aware that she was about to publicly expose the hypocritical facade of her husband. However, she felt no pity for him, considering the humiliation she had endured recently. So she began to speak with a smile. We all remember that Alejandro needed money to open a second auto repair shop. He didn't want to take out a loan, and he couldn't borrow such a sum. That's when Alex turned to his mother, asking her to sell the 3-room apartment and promising to buy her a 1-room apartment in return. Marga refused, telling her son that the apartment would be a future gift for her granddaughter's wedding. Her response didn't please her son, but he kept silent then. Later, I ended up in the hospital, and at the same time, Marga's health deteriorated. She turned to her son, asking Alex to take her in. However, Alejandro told his mother that he had an emergency at work and couldn't properly take care of her. Instead, he suggested she stay in an expensive nursing home. The elderly woman believed in her son. She thought about what a caring child she had raised. Meanwhile, Alejandro handed his mother papers, betrayed her, and the elderly woman signed documents allowing her son to deal with the real estate. That's how Alex took possession of Marga's apartment. After that, he placed his mom in the so-called nursing home. The revelation hung in the air, leaving the guests stunned. After this, Ramona paused. The guests were sitting in silence, waiting for her to continue. She looked at her husband, who stared at her disdainfully. Subconsciously, Ramona expected him to apologize and ask her not to say anything further. However, seeing Alejandro's gaze, she realized that her husband felt no shame, and she continued her narrative. When Alex pulled off this scam, he told everyone that his mom had gone abroad. At that time, it seemed strange to me, but I sincerely trusted my husband. I waited for some time, expecting my mother-in-law to settle into her new place. However, as time passed, Marga didn't show up. So, I turned to my husband about it. Astonishingly, Alejandro was evasive about his mother when I asked. That's when I felt something was wrong. I went to the address where my mother-in-law used to live. There, I accidentally ran into a neighbor who told me everything about the nursing home. I was shocked by my husband's lies, but chose not to confront him and began searching for Marga on my own. I visited several nursing homes, but she wasn't anywhere to be found. I was bewildered, not knowing how to locate my mother-in-law. I revisited the nursing homes, and in one of the institutions, I was advised to look for a relative in the elderly care home. That's where I found Marga. If you could have seen how happy she was to see me, the elderly woman burst into tears of joy. My mother-in-law told me about the documents, how she signed them, and that her son never visited. I asked her why she hadn't come herself, and at that moment, I realized I had asked a foolish question because Marga can barely move. After this, Ramona paused again, looking at the guests. The room fell silent, everyone shocked by the story they had heard. She remained silent for a while, then, still looking at those present in the room, she continued. But that's not all. I was waiting for someone to ask why Marga didn't call, given that she has a mobile phone. There's a little story here, too. It turns out Alejandro had everything planned. He told his mother that he accidentally dropped her cell phone in the water, and it no longer worked. Alex promised his mom that he would buy her a new phone, but, as you can all understand, he never did. And I want to say one more thing, Alejandro placed his mother in a less than reputable nursing home. Unfortunately, not all facilities have decent staff. It happened that Marga ended up in such a nursing home. After these words, Ramona fell silent and turned to her husband. She looked at him coldly, then smiled and began to slowly clear the leftovers from the table. The guests were watching her in stunned silence. Ramona did not rush with her actions. At that moment, she realized that she had shocked everyone with this story. When only the bread remained to be packed, she turned to her husband and said in a low voice, "So, my dear husband, I've gathered the leftovers from the festive table. This food will be served on the table for your dear mother and my mom from the village." At that moment, Valeriano stood up, looking disdainfully at his friend. With slightly noticeable anger, he said he didn't expect such behavior from a friend. Alejandro remained silent, having nothing to say in his defense. Then Eduardo spoke up, addressing the apartment owner. "What have you done, Alex? Marga is your own mother, and you treated her like this. Valeriano was right. We didn't expect you'd be so mean. The man wanted to continue speaking, but Ramona interrupted him. Eduardo, sorry for cutting in, but I want to bring to your attention that, even though you and Alex are friends, he envies that you have such a life. That's why he decided to open a restaurant. However, the business failed. He couldn't stand that your business ventures were going well. So, Alex decided that if the restaurant wasn't successful, he would open an auto repair shop. He did that, but at what cost? Now everyone understands the source of Alejandro's funds to acquire the auto repair shop. Also, it's clear what finances he used to buy the 3-room apartment. And here comes the doorbell, Ramona exclaimed. The dearest guests have arrived. She rushed to open the door. Shortly after, Marga entered the room, leaning on 2 crutches, followed by her neighbor, and then Wanda. Ramona brought up the rear. Marga approached her son, who immediately lowered his head. Alejandro didn't want to look at his mother, while the elderly woman placed her hand on his head and gently caressed him. Then, she asked Valeriano to help her sit next to her son. He hurriedly assisted the woman, and only then did Marga address her son. Well, hello, son. I came to congratulate you on your birthday. I apologize for not bringing a gift, but that's how it turned out. Thank you for what you've done. I won't scold you, there's no point in it. There's a folk wisdom that says the boomerang law has not been repealed. I won't, and yet, I didn't want this law to affect you. What else can I say to you? But there isn't much. I feel sorry for you only in front of your friends, your wife, and Ariel. Apparently, I missed something in your upbringing that you could treat your mother this way. And now, with your permission, I'll address your wife. After all, it's thanks to her that I'm sitting here in front of you. With these words, Marga turned her head to Ramona and smiled affectionately. Then, the elderly woman beckoned her daughter-in-law with her finger, and she approached and squatted down in front of her. Marga gently stroked the girl's head and said softly, I've already thanked you for everything, but I want these people to know what you've done for me. No need for words of thanks. I did it for you because I love and respect you, Ramona replied. Don't contradict an old lady, dear. You are a good girl. Here the woman paused, looked at the guests, and then addressed those present in the room. My daughter-in-law found me in our big city. She visited more than one institution before finding me. But that's not the main thing. Ramona took me from the nursing home and brought me to her mother's village. There, she told us how her husband humiliates her in front of guests. That's when we all decided to make a gift for my son the next time he insults Rami. A couple of days before the celebration, she brought us to the city and took us to my former neighbor, who hosted us this time. We had to tell her the truth because the lie would eventually be exposed. The neighbor was shocked when she found out everything. She thought I was living with my son. Marga fell silent, and silence reigned. None of those present in the room wanted to speak. This lasted for about 15 minutes until Alejandro broke the silence with anger and said, What are you turning me into a monster for? Do you know what it's like when your best friend gets richer every year? Or do you understand what it's like when your wife disobeys and gives birth against my wishes? Do you even comprehend what it's like when a spouse gains weight and completely neglects themselves? Stop spouting nonsense. Valeriano interrupted Alejandro and then continued to speak. No one stopped you from developing your business in your own direction. As far as I know, Eduardo initially advised you against opening a restaurant. He immediately warned you that it was an unsuitable place. And regarding Ariel, I can't understand one thing. Are you dissatisfied that you have a beautiful daughter growing up? I'll say about your wife too, she's an extraordinary woman, and you should be proud to have such a wife. At this moment, Valeriano touched Ramona's hand and asked him not to continue but to give her a word. The man smiled at the woman and said that he was a gentleman and would always give way to a lady. Ramona thanked Valeriano and turned to her husband. We've sorted out the issue with the leftovers, and now let's make another bold point with my fullness. Does my figure irritate you? I can reassure you, from now on, you won't see it because we're getting a divorce. Don't even think about scaring me into thinking that our daughter will stay with you. After your words, I understood that, in fact, you don't really need Ariel. You just didn't want to pay child support after the divorce, and you don't care about the child. And I can also add that everything in my life will be fine, and I will find someone who will love me as I am. At that moment, Valeriano interrupted the woman. He apologized to Ramona and said that a person who would love her already existed. Ramona smiled. She knew that her husband's friend had been interested in her from the day they met. Meanwhile, Valeriano continued speaking. You know that I have feelings for you, and that's why, in front of everyone present, I suggest that you get a divorce as soon as possible and consider my candidature as a new husband. And believe me, I like your figure even more than before. And I also promise that you will never hear a hurtful word from me. Of course, I won't replace Ariel's biological father, but I promise to be a good friend. Now, the floor is yours. After these words, Ramona was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Her mother came to her aid, saying that if she fell out of love with her husband, it would make no sense to keep the family. The elderly woman added that Valeriano's proposal shouldn't have been accepted immediately, but should have been thought over. After listening to her mother, Ramona nodded in agreement and was about to say something when Alejandro spoke up. He rudely stated that he would not agree to a divorce under any circumstances. At that moment, his chosen one looked at him and said with surprise, "Wait, you hate me. So why resist the divorce? I can also say that I don't love you. Everything burns out, it happens. So there's no need to act all high and mighty now. I already told you wouldn't get a divorce." In the midst of the conversation between the husband and wife, Valeriano intervened, addressing Alejandro. You know, I'm sorry that we're not in the times when there were duels. I would gladly do that now. From this moment on, you understand that our friendship is over. I won't even shake your hand when we meet, I'll just walk by, not noticing you. And as for you, you can shake the air with as many empty words as you want, but the divorce will happen because your wife wants it. And if you try to intimidate Ramona, believe me, she has a protector ready to go to great lengths to ensure this woman is happy. You are to blame for what happened. Ramona loved you with all her heart, and you knew it, as did everyone else. But you mocked her and trampled on her love. So be a man now, step aside, and don't hinder Ramona from living on. Valeriano spoke up and turned to his beloved woman. He smiled encouragingly at her and asked her not to worry. In response, Ramona smiled and thanked the man again for his support. Then Valeriano turned to Marga and said, "You shouldn't be ashamed of your son in front of us. Alejandro is no longer a child, and he must be responsible for his actions. Also, I suggest that both you and Ramona's mother live with me at the dacha. There's fresh air, there's heating, in short, all the conditions for heavenly living. And now I suggest that we all leave the host's apartment. Let him stay alone with his thoughts. I think he has a lot to think about." After these words, Valeriano suggested that Ramona gather the most necessary things. The woman looked at the man in surprise and asked where she would live. He laughed and offered his own apartment. Ramona smiled and replied that she hadn't accepted his proposal regarding hand and heart yet, so there was no need to hurry. Valeriano smiled and said, "Well, think about it at my place. And you know I'll behave like a true gentleman. If you don't accept my offer, we'll find you separate accommodations." Ramona looked at Valeriano with gratitude once again, and unexpectedly, everyone replied that she had agreed to become his wife. Those present in the room cheered and applauded, except for Alejandro, who went to the window and turned away from everyone. Alex's mother approached him and quietly said, "Son, you're to blame for everything yourself. And now, here's my motherly advice, think about your behavior. It's never too late to change for the better. If you realize that, you know where to find me. Look for me either at Ramona's mother's place or at Valeriano's country house. I would really like you to find the strength in yourself to realize what you've done in this life. That's all I wanted to tell you, son."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.